Hi folks, I'm going to read to you a little bit of Frindle. I hope you enjoy it. We'll see how many chapters we can do tonight. I solidly know that we will do 2. We'll see if we hit a third. Chapter 6, The Big Idea. 3 things happened later that same afternoon. Nick and Janet Fisk had missed the bus because of school newspaper meeting, so they walked home together. They were seeing who could walk along the curb without falling. It took a lot of concentration, and when Janet stepped off into the street, Nick said, "That's 3 points for me." But Janet said, "I didn't fall. I saw something. Look." She bent down and picked up a gold ballpoint pen, the fancy kind. That was the first thing. Janet finding the pen. Then they got back on the curb, and Nick followed Janet, putting one foot carefully in front of the other on the narrow concrete curb. And while he stepped along, he thought back over the school day, especially about his report and what Miss Granger had said about words at the end of the period finally sank in. That was the second thing, understanding what Miss Granger had said. She had said, "Who says dog means dog?" "You do, Nicholas." "You do, Nicholas," he repeated to himself. "I do," Nick thought, still putting one foot in front of the other, following Janet. What does that mean? And then Nick remembered something. When he was about 2 years old, his mom had brought him one of those unbreakable cassette players and a bunch of sing-along tapes. He had loved them, and he played them over and over and over and over again. He would carry the tape and the player to his mother or his big brother and his father and bang them together, say "Quaggala, quaggala, quaggala," until someone put the cassette in the machine and turned it on. And for 3 years, whenever he said "Quaggala," his family knew that he wanted to hear those pretty sounds made with voices and instruments. Then when Nick went to preschool, he learned that if he wanted his teacher and the other kids to understand him, he had to use the word music. But "Quaggala" meant the nice sound to Nick because Nick said so. Who said "Quaggala" means music? You do, Nicholas. "No fair!" yelled Janet. They were at the corner of their own street, and Nick had bumped into her, completely absorbed in his own thoughts. Janet stumbled off the curb, and then the gold pen in her hand clattered onto the street. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, honest," said Nick. "I just wasn't watching. Here." Nick stooped over and picked up the pen and held it up out to her. "Here's your—" And that's when the third thing happened. Nick didn't say pen. Instead, he said, "Here's your Frindle." "Frindle?" Janet took her pen and looked at him like he was nuts. She wrinkled her nose and said, "What's a Frindle?" Nick grinned and said, "You'll find out. See you later." It was there. Nick grinned and said, "You'll find out. See you later." Sorry, I had to break for a second to help the baby. It was there at the corner of Spring Street and South Grand Avenue, 1 block from home, on a September afternoon. That's when Nick got the big idea. And by the time he had run down the street and up the stairs and through the door and upstairs to his room, it wasn't just a big idea. It was a plan, a whole plan, just begging for Nick to put it into action. And action was Nick's middle name. Here's the picture of him. Oops, there you go, folks. The next day after school, the plan began. Nick walked into the penny pantry store and asked the lady behind the counter for a Frindle. She squinted at him. "A what?" "A Frindle, please. A black one," said Nick, and smiled at her. She leaned over closer and aimed one ear at him. "You want a what?" "A Frindle." And this time Nick pointed at the ballpoint pen behind her on the shelf. "A black one, please." The lady handed Nick the pen. He handed her 49 cents and said, "Thank you," and left the store. 6 days later, Janet stood at the counter of the penny pantry. The same store, the same lady. John had come in the day before, and Pete the day before that, and Chris the day before that, and Dave the day before that. Janet was the 5th kid that Nick had sent there to ask that woman for a Frindle. And when she asked the lady, reached right for the pen and said, "Blue or black?" Nick was standing one aisle away at the candy racks, and he was grinning. Frindle was a real word. It meant pen. Who says Frindle means pen? You do, Nicholas. Half an hour later, a group of serious fifth graders had a meeting in Nick's playroom. It was John, Pete, Dave, Chris, and Janet. And Nick, and that's 6 kids, 6 secret agents. They held up their right hands and read the oath Nick had written out. "From this day on and forever, I will never use the word pen again. Instead, I will use the word Frindle. And I will do everything possible so that others will too." And all 6 of them signed the oath with Nick's Frindle. The plan would work. Thanks, Miss Granger. Word wars. Sorry, the baby's in the room. School was the perfect place to launch a new word. And since this was a major historical event, Nick wanted it to begin in exactly the right class. 7th period language arts. Nick raised his hand first thing after the bell rang and said, "Miss Granger, I forgot my Frindle." Sitting 3 rows away, John blurted out, "I have an extra one you can borrow, Nick." Then John made a big show of looking for something in his backpack. "I think I have an extra Frindle. I told my mom to get me 3 or 4. I'm sure I had an extra Frindle in here yesterday, but I must have taken it. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, here it is." And then John made a big show of throwing it over to Nick, and Nick missed it on purpose. Then he made a big show of finding it. Miss Granger and every kid in the class got the message loud and clear. The black plastic thing that Nick borrowed from John had a funny name, a different name, a new name, Frindle. There was a lot of giggling, but Miss Granger turned up the power in her eyes and swept the room into silence. And the rest of the class went by according to plan. Her plan. As everyone was leaving after class, Miss Granger said, "Nicholas, I'd like to have a word with you." As she emphasized the word word. Nick's mouth felt dry, and he gulped, but his mind stayed clear. He walked up to her desk. "Yes, Miss Granger?" "It's a funny idea, Nicholas, but I will not have my class disrupted again. Is that clear?" Her eyes were lit up, but it was mostly light, not much heat. "Idea? What idea?" said Nicholas as he tried to make his eyes as blank as possible. "You know what I mean, Nicholas. I am talking about the performance that you and John gave at the start of class. I'm talking about this." And she held up her pen, an old maroon fountain pen with a blue cap. "But I really didn't have a Frindle with me," said Nick, amazed at his own bravery. And hiding behind his glasses, Nick kept his eyes wide and blank. Miss Granger's eyes flashed and then narrowed, and her lips formed a thin line. She was very quiet for a few seconds, and then she said, "I see. Very well. Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss today. Nicholas, you may go." "Thanks, Miss Granger," said Nick as he grabbed his backpack and headed for the door. And when he just stepped into the hallway, he said, "And I promise I won't ever forget my Frindle again. Bye." We'll do one more chapter. Chapter 8. Mightier than the sword. 2 days later, the photographer came to take class pictures. The fifth grade picture would be taken last, right after lunch. That gave Nick and his secret agents plenty of time, and they whispered something into the ear of every fifth grader. All the individual pictures had been taken, and finally it was time for the group picture. Everyone was lined up in the auditorium, hair looked great, and everyone was smiling. But when the photographer said, "Say cheese," no one did. Instead, every kid said, "Frindle," and they held one up in the camera to see. The photographer was out of film, so that shot was the only fifth grade group picture he took. 6 of the fifth grade teachers were not pleased, and Miss Granger was furious. No one had really wanted to make the teachers mad. It was just fun. It also got all the kids in school talking about the new word. And when people pick up a new word, they say it all the time. The kids at Lincoln Elementary School liked Nick's new word. A lot. But not Miss Granger. The day after the class picture, she made an announcement to each of her classes, and she posted a notice on the main bulletin board by the office. Anyone who is heard using the word Frindle instead of the word pen will be stay after school and write the sentence 100 times. I am writing this punishment with a pen. Miss Granger. But that just made everyone want to use Nick's word even more. Staying after school with the lone Granger became a badge of honor. There were kids in her classroom every day after school. It went on like that for a couple of weeks. One day near the end of seventh period, Miss Granger asked Nick to come talk to her after school. This is not detention, Nicholas. I just want to talk. Nick was excited. It was kind of like a conference during a war. One side waves a white flag and the generals come out and talk. General Nicholas Allen. Nick liked the sound of that. He stuck his head in Miss Granger's doorway after school. You want to talk with me? Yes, Nicholas, please come in and sit down. When he settled, she looked at him and said, Don't you think this Frindle business has gone far enough? It's just a disruption to the school, don't you think? Nick swallowed hard, but he said, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just fun, and it's a really real word. It's not a bad word, just different. And besides, it's how words really change, isn't it? That's what you said. Miss Granger sighed. It is how a word could be made up a brand new, I suppose. But the word pen, should it really be replaced by that other word? The word pen has a long, rich history. It comes from the Latin word for feather, pinna. It started to become our word pen because quills were made from feathers. Were some of them first right? They were some of the first writing tools. It's a word that comes from somewhere. It makes sense, Nicholas. But Frindle makes sense, just as much to me, said Nick. After all, didn't someone just make up the word pinna too? That got a spark from Miss Granger's eyes. But all she said was, Then you're not going to stop this. And Nick looked right in her eyes and said, Well, me, and I mean a bunch of my friends and I, took an oath about using the word, and we have to keep our promise. And besides, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I like my word. Nick tried to look brave, like a good general should. Very well, then. I thought it would end up this way. Miss Granger pulled a fat white envelope from her desk and held it up. This is a letter I have written to you, Nicholas. Nick held out his hand, thinking she was going to give it to him, but she didn't. I'm not going to send this to you until all of this is over. I want you to sign your name and put today's date across the back of the envelope. When you read it, whenever that may be, you will know it is the same letter and that I have not made any changes to it. This is weird, Nick said to himself, but to Miss Granger he said, Sure. And he signed his name in his best cursive and put the date underneath it. Then Miss Granger stood up abruptly and said, That is all for today, Nicholas, and may the best word win. There was a frown on her face, but her eyes were different, almost happy. And Nick was halfway down the hall before it hit him. She likes the war, and she wants to win real bad. Walking to school the next day, Pete had a great idea. How about we see if we can get every kid in the whole fifth grade to go up and ask Miss Granger, Can I borrow a Frindle? You mean, Miss Granger, may I borrow a Frindle? Said Dave. Gotta use good grammar. Don't want to upset Dangerous Grangerous. Sounds good to me, said Nick. She can't keep everyone after school, can she? And this is a picture of the conference between Nick and Miss Granger, where he signs the envelope. Almost 80 kids stayed after school with Miss Granger that day. They filled her room and spilled out into the hallway. The principal had to stay late to help, and they had to arrange 2 special late buses to get all the kids home. And the next day, all the fifth graders did it again. And so did a lot of other students. Over 200 kids. Parents called to complain. The school bus drivers threatened to go on strike, and the school board and the superintendent got involved. And about this time, the principal of Lincoln Elementary School paid a little visit to Mr. and Mrs. Allen. She wanted to talk to them about their son, the one in 5th grade, the one named Nick. That's where we're going to stop today. This video should be in your classroom and on YouTube. Have a good evening, folks.